Welcome to Universal Heritage Television Nigeria. We bring you today a special edition of the Daybreak Nigeria program. My name is Afam Echi, your anchor. We are going to discuss the national budget. The budget was led at the National Assembly by President Muhammad Buhari early this month. As at the moment, it has undergone second reading. More work is being done on it. We are going to discuss the budget by looking at the issues that surround it. We are not going to give a deep insight because it's still a work in progress. So there may not be sectoral dissection of the budget, but we'll play around the issues that surround the budget. I have two gentlemen here. On my left is Dr. Desmond Echeta. Dr. Echeta is a senior lecturer. Is a senior lecturer in economics at the University of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences, Omagwo, here in Imo State. Dr. Echeta, you are welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Afam, for inviting me. Thank you, our viewers.
I also have to add that Dr. Echeta is a public sector economist and a consultant. On my right is Dr. Chinedu Mosu, who is of the Department of Economics, Avaniko College of Education. Doc, you're welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
I want you to, at the end of the program, to remember to like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Here we go. The budget. The president led the budget early this month, and it's in public domain right now. It has attracted some comments. But two issues that appear to play out critically, I have to observe, is the issue of the debt stock, which has increased and is giving concern to a lot of persons. When the president was discussing the budget, he made a statement, he made a comment on what probably would have led to the huge debt stock, which as at June this year has risen to 42.8 trillion. It gives cause for concern. Let me quote him exactly as he made the statement. He said, "As you are aware, we have witnessed two economic recessions within the period of this administration. A direct result is the significant decline in our revenue generating capacity. In both cases, we had to spend our way out of recession, resulting in higher public debt and debt service. It is unlikely that our recovery from each of the two recessions would have been as fast without the sustained government expenditure funded by public debt. In this year, in the 2023 budget, there's also going to be a deficit financing. There's going to be a gap to be funded by borrowing, again, to the amount of, to the tune of 8.8 trillion or something thereabout. Now, if you put the two figures together, that will be coming close to about 50 trillion in debt. Now, my question is this, Dr. Echeta, I ask you, which would be a lesser evil, to go through the pangs of recession than to accumulate huge budget burden for the generations who did not know anything about, who did not benefit from this debt? So which would have been a lesser evil?
Thank you. You see, generally, whether it is a developing country or developed country or a transiting economy, that is something that the public sector economics will always want to dissect at all times. And the problem we have in Nigeria is not that we are borrowing, but just that when we borrow, we find it difficult to put it in productive ventures. And that explains why the sustainability has to be dissected. Now, if you borrow, for instance, you must have a target venture, a target investment where you are going to put such fund into, with the understanding that after some time, the cash flows you generate will be able to pay off the interest, and at the end of the day, you at least make your own economy better than you were supposed to be initially. So in Nigeria today, it's important to understand the background of this debt we are talking about. Remember, by 1999, when Olusegun Obasanjo was the president, I tell you, that was the only time the debt management office was established. So people countries could just come up and say, oh, Nigeria, you are owing us so amount. And Nigeria will go on their knees and begin to beg. But again, it is important that successive governments that borrowed were not able to actually utilize those money for productive ventures. Most of those monies borrowed never even saw the shores of this country. They remained overseas. So to that extent, we say that borrowing is bad. But I want to also tell you that the best...
What actually do you mean? You said we borrowed, but the money never got to this country.
Yes.
So who utilized it then?
You see, when we talk about, for example, the mantra of this present Muhammadu Buhari's administration is fighting corruption. So due to corruption, those monies never saw the shores of Nigeria. They were diverted. The simple word is that they were diverted. And if you divert it, remember that where you borrowed it from, the records are there. And it keeps mounting. It continued mounting. But if you borrow and it gets to the shores of Nigeria, it is used for one project or the other. Such projects will naturally pay for the money you have borrowed. But those money never saw the shores of this country. And it continues like that. And that explains why the Muhammadu Buhari administration is talking about fighting corruption. But that is a matter for another day. The extent the corruption has been fought is to be interrogated. But again, we have seen that even the immediate past administration, the administration of Goodluck Jonathan, saw debt, but not in this dimension. We have seen that as of today, we have over 42 trillion in debt by the government of Nigeria. So, to the question you asked, we know that whatever we have accrued in form of debt, unborn generation will also suffer it. And that's what we call intergenerational burden of debt. They will suffer it. But what are we going to do in the present circumstance? You talked about recession. I also disagree when we talk about recession, the way we talk about recession. If you say Nigeria slumped into recession 2 times in this administration, I tell you, recession is when you have manufacturing firms. We don't have manufacturing firms. So how do you now begin to rate if we entered recession or we did not enter recession? Nigeria is not producing anything. We only bank on that oil. And once there are disturbances in oil flow, then we'll suffer it. Yes, the COVID-19 affected the world economy. Even the war in Ukraine today is also affecting the world economy. The Nigeria that is supposed to have benefited from that war is now suffering it because you have high prices of fuel today. Now, even though the barrels of oil, the prices are increasing, but again, what you are paying in form of subsidies is also distorting what should have been our expected gains. So that is just the predicament we are into. So whether you talk about recession, I don't believe in whatever they call the recession. The reason is that we do not have a manufacturing sector. If you go to other countries, it is a manufacturing sector that actually drive the economy. But today, we are not producing anything, so we virtually import everything. Look at the disturbances. Now we have flood. I tell you, we have to get prepared for the worst situation because all that have been planted have been eroded. The little that the terrorists allowed the farmers to cultivate they have all been eroded due to the natural disaster of flood. So it is going to be a really trying moment for us coming next year.
It's okay, really trying moment. Dr. Mosu, as a way to navigate out of the challenge of deficit financing, recently a report today indicated that the federal government had planned to sell off some key assets, about 25 of them, either through concessioning or placing some of them on equity, or outright sell, whatever it is. And if that is one of the ways they have resolved to handle the issue of deficit financing, do you still think that the budget will be realized, achieved? Because given the timeline, the time frame within which these things will be realized and the money generated, do you not see that as a reverse? The budget is going to suffer some reverses.
Okay, thank you. I would like to first of all disagree with my colleague.
Okay.
Budgeting is what we do every year, it's an annual thing, and you do your budgeting given the prevailing both local, domestic economic circumstances and global economic circumstances. Now, that's what we call shocks in economics. Most of the times you build your budget with high optimism, but then along the line, unforeseen shocks can come. For instance, COVID-19 was unforeseen. He mentioned flooding now is unforeseen. And like you said, that will be discussion for another day, because very soon we are going to see inflationary pressures, high prices, energy crisis. Yesterday we had that one of natural gas company, liquefied natural gas, have shut down. Yes, operation, and then what that's going to do to our prices. So I usually like analyzing issues concerning Nigerian economy from that optimistic point. I, as a person, I anticipated that the borrowing will continue. But when you borrow, are you borrowing to do what? So if we assume that the different scenarios built in the medium-term expenditure framework were to be constant, you see that the deficit financing we are talking about may not necessarily be the problem, because it's like a father in the house. You can't tell your child that there's no money. You are the government, it's your responsibility to source for this money. So I do believe that given what the government has marshaled out, borrowing 8.8 trillion, for instance, to finance the budget, selling assets, the key problem there is how has previous budgets performed. If you look at 2022 budgets, for instance, you discover that it underperformed, given the shortages, the cutting that we had in oil production, because Nigeria has depended more on oil revenue to finance for its fiscal activities. So you see that the cut in crude oil production is affecting our revenue. So we are losing about 717,000 barrels per day, given also what's covering now, the oil theft issue, the vandalism issue. So if we depend on oil alone, it means that Nigeria may never get out of mounting debt. However, if you look at the budget very, very well, the oil itself has been reduced, in the sense that what we are expecting, the revenue we're expecting from oil is about 1.923 or thereabout. So this is about 19 point something percent of the expected revenue. So we discovered that government is already planning to diversify on areas that they cannot generate more revenue to finance this deficit. So to that extent,
what is this area of diversification?
One of the things I would have suggested is for government to restructure, first of all, our expenditure. He mentioned fuel subsidy, for instance.
Okay.
It's pure Acadian issue. That's what they call Acadian equivalent. You are postponing the doomsday, why don't you remove fuel subsidy now, and then whatever money you get from so close to 3.3 trillion was spent in the first quarter of 2022. So now if we continue like that, we'll be running about 6.something trillion, and that will eventually impact on our capital expenditure. So at the end of the day, you discover that if you are spending more on consumption, when are you going to eventually spend on critical infrastructure that's supposed to create the enabling environment that will attract private sectors who are actually the drivers of an economy? So I believe that at the end of the day, what we do, what we are borrowing, is going to actually determine whether we are going to come out of the borrowing or whether we are going to continue to borrow.
Yeah, to some extent, when you talked about oil subsidy, many people have different opinion about the subsidy. Some, even from very high quarters, people who should know better. I think recently I read something about something coming out from Sanusi, the former CBN governor. I think he is one person who believes that the subsidy is a scam. Some people believe it's a scam. Some people also look at the impact it is going to have on the populace. And then, so when you call for the total removal of the subsidy immediately, you are talking about shock. Do you also think about the reaction that it will generate from the people?
Let me first of all say this.
Yeah, because you know
we don't borrow to finance consumption. We borrow for production. Now, the debts you are talking about, major part of it has been borrowed to finance consumption, to pay salaries. Now, at the end of the, you discover that we are just doing reverse economics. That's not the way the market economics work. Now, like you pointed out, the petroleum subsidy don't get to the actual people who need it. It doesn't get to the poor. Now, Jonathan in 2012 tried to remove the subsidy. And then people like some people took to the street, Save and Nigeria took to the street, and at the end of the day, look at where we are now. So if you ask me, the problem of subsidy is keeping us from developing. I'm not going to go into the issues of whether the institutions handling it are doing it well or not, but the essence of it is that the people who are benefiting, it's not necessarily because the money is being stolen, but the typical poor person does not own a car, he does not drive a car, but then he uses transport. And at the end of the day, this first subsidy does not actually impact on his life or his or her life. So I believe that if we want to get it right now, let's maybe gradually remove the subsidy.
So which is different from outright removal.
Yes, well, this past administration have said they may likely remove it by June next year, between now and June next year, and then they've already marked so much money for subsidy in this current appropriation bill. But if you check it that way, we will eventually see some other shocks that will require that we do something now, maybe, depending on some other things that the government is going to build into their revenue generation. We may not actually have prices to increase. Our refineries are not working. We still import this fuel. So how do we expect to continue to import fuel when we actually can refine this fuel at a very cheap cost? So if we put the right measures in place and remove the subsidy, over time the prices will drop, and then we would have to talk about subsidy again. Then the money that comes from subsidy can be used for capital expenditure.
Okay, Dr. Cheta,
Yes.
let me come to the issue of recurrent expenditure. The recurrent expenditure is put at 8.2 trillion. That's about 43% or so of the total budget size. And when discussion came up at the National Assembly, I remember Senator Alain Dume was very, very critical. He quoted a lot of things because the recurrent expenditure has always enjoyed some increase from year to year, even when there was no need for it. If you go back to records during the period of COVID-19, there was not much activity. Most of the things were done electronically, and so not so much spending. But we still had that budget running and increasing even up to now. And we are not. The government has not still has embargoed employment, and they're not hiring, and people are leaving the civil service and all that. When at the time people should expect that it should go down, it is increasing. You know. So what actually do you make of that? Does it do you in any way suggest or perceive? You know, there is this thing they call budget padding. You know, that has always played that. Sometime I know either 2015, 2016 when Buhari was new in government, there was one controversy, one scandal of budget. I don't know how that matter ended up, but people believe that it has always been there. Budget has been padded. You know, it is one of the processes through which public officers steal. So, what do you think? Why do you think the budget? What makes you think the budget, the recurrent expenditure votes will continue to increase?
Okay, generally, if you look at the way budgets are prepared, there are certain assumptions. You could say, look, we are just upwards by certain percent. You must have that. In fact, you build it in when budget is being planned, so that you say, okay, for this year, if we had 3% last year in 2022, for 2023, let's put it at 4%. The essence of that is to take care of inflationary trends. Just like in developed countries, if there is inflation today in UK, for instance, there is a kind of automatic adjustment in workers' salary, okay, to now reflect the changes, so that if inflation is increased by, let's say, 2%, the workers' salary, their wages should also increase by 2%. By so doing, you have re-established the equilibrium that had been distorted. But does it happen in our own client? No, it doesn't happen. So the same thing is the reason why you see that if budget is maybe the recurrent expenditure is put at, let's say, 100 million in 2022, obviously in 2023 is going to increase to take care of the inflationary trend. So there is nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong is the actual implementation and execution of the budget. Today, we don't see proper execution and proper implementation of the budget. That boils down to the subsidy we are talking about. You see, we are talking about subsidy removal. I wouldn't want the subsidy to be removed instantaneously. It should be a gradual thing.
Which the government is doing right now.
Yeah, they are pretending to be doing that. They are not. Because if you check at the inception of this present administration, even before this present administration came on board, they told us that subsidy was scam. Okay, this is 7.5 years down the line. That subsidy is still there. But again, you discover that most of those people that have been given the contract, the concession to import this fuel, at the end of the day, will import empty vessels. But they import these empty vessels. They pretend they are emptying it somewhere. They have not emptied it into any. Those monies goes into the private pockets. That boils down to what we are saying. So you don't see false declarations here and there. And who suffers it? It is all of us. So some persons use that as an avenue to enrich themselves. So use it to settle your friends, cronies, and all that. We are in this country when one type of fuel was imported and it damaged a lot of vehicles of people. And responsible government should have been able to pay compensation to those car owners that their vehicles were damaged. But nothing happened.
And we are not aware that anybody was punished.
Nobody was punished. So it's as simple as that. So I tell you, if you go to the proper audit, if you do good forensic audit of the subsidy stuff, you see that so many persons will be in prison. So many persons will be in prison. So government will continue to intervene. Remember, when you talk about subsidy, it means, look, you're not going to pay the full amount of that money. Pay part of it, then government is going to augment it. That's part of social security. That's part of government taking responsibility, which is normal. During the COVID-19 in UK, in US, people that were not working were receiving salaries, and that is part of the reason Boris Johnson had problem, because some people also declared that they had XYZ number of workers when they didn't have that, and because government was sincere, government continued paying to those establishments. But at the end of the day, the UK government ran into a lot of expenses, and Boris Johnson resorted to taxing the citizens. And you know, I think it's of the conservative. They don't like anything about tax. They want you to lower expenditure, because when you lower expenditure, you will not tax the people. And it has also consumed the new prime minister. Yes. And again, you see, when you have responsible government, the budget, part of the reason she is suffering what she has suffered now is because of the budget. The budget was not scrutinized by the appropriate quarters. Okay. So she felt it was a mini budget, and before you know it, it took her to the cleaners. And what is happening today? So when we talk about a subsidy, we must be sure of how to remove it. You don't just say, oh, you are going to remove it immediately. But the corruption that surrounds the subsidy is what we should watch out for. By the time we get it correctly there, then we'll get the best for our economy.
Yeah, from the analysis coming from both of you, it boils down to the fact that corruption is a major factor inhibiting the implementation of the budget. From the oil, what do you call it? Oil bunker, the stealing of oil in the Niger Delta, which is affecting the total revenue coming to the government, from the subsidy scam, and then non-implement, a lot of things. Everything revolves around corruption. Dr. Chinedu, what then is the position of the man in the street? I had somebody, when Buhari was presenting this budget, from out of the window, I looked in where I was listening. Somebody said, these people, you are saying the figure 20.5 trillion was huge money for him. He said, share this money and give us our own. Let me, I know how to speak, and he can now know he doesn't understand the workings, the mechanism, Now, that person on the street saying, give me my own share, I know what to do with it. What is his position when all of this money, this humongous huge sum, gets into private pockets? What is the placement? What is the position of the man out there in the street?
First of all, government don't share money. The person asking government to give you his own part should go and work. You earn money. You put your hand to productive venture, and then you earn money. Let me also bring out this particular aspect of the budget. Now, government proposed 20.51 trillion. Now, if you convert that at the official exchange rate of about 439 naira per dollar, it will give you about 46 billion US dollar. Now, if you divide the current proposed budget by about 200 million population of Nigeria, what comes to each person, like I was talking about, is on per capita basis, is about 95,000 naira per annum. Now, if you break it down to months, it's about 7,600 naira per month. Now, our minimum wage, we know, is 30,000 naira. So, on per capita basis, the average Nigerian, whether on the street, you and I, what is due to us from the budget is 7,600 naira. Now, one of the things I and Dr. Echeta will agree is that there is what we call infrastructural gap. Now, you do not budget to consume. Like you're talking about deficit financing, talking about mounting debt. 5% of total personnel cost is what we are paying as debt service. So you discover that what we actually need, I still emphasize, is that government should, in developed climate, will you see recurrent expenditure being far higher than capital expenditure. And we're talking about a budget of fiscal sustainability, budget of economic growth, and budget of security. So if government can find a way to increase our capital expenditure, create the critical infrastructures, and attract investors, an average man on the street will have employment. So if eventually we are talking about poverty reduction without creating the enabling environment for some of the small businesses, a typical farmer in the village will eventually have access to some form of small credit to get herself engaged, and at the end of the day she will also have the required infrastructure, maybe road, electricity to dry or preserve whatever thing she's doing, and then bring that to the market to sell. So the average man of the street should realize first of all that what he or she needs is not money. What he needs is for government to create job opportunities, productivity opportunities, so that he himself will put his hands to work and be able to earn legitimate money. So government is not sharing money per se. And let me also add to what Dr. Desmond said concerning the humongous personnel cost. It is because government is in the business of employment. It's not supposed to be so. You and I agree that it is the private sector that's supposed to drive the economy.
Yes.
And government is paying as high as 4.99 trillion as personnel costs. Why? When that should have gone into other capital investment and opportunities. So you discover that it is because government is in the business of employing and then paying money. A typical person will not want to work in the private sector. He wants to work for the government because the government is paying. Meanwhile, it's supposed to be the reverse. If you go abroad, like he's pointing out, people don't like working for the government because they know the government is very conservative. Yeah. They like working where they be given opportunity to actually show what they can do, and they give their value and they get paid.
And they are rewarded according to their productivity.
Exactly. So it is because somehow some people believe that it is a national kick mentality thing, that somebody in the street will say, government, give me money and all that. It doesn't work like that. If you're not working and producing something, give you money at in the long run will not actually solve your problem. Of course, the effect of inflation is going to erode whatever money you've been given.
Okay, that's very interesting. What are the issues that, okay, let me ask you, let me stay with you, Dr. Chinedu. To what extent what percentage performance have we been able to achieve in the past budgets? And what do you think these budgets, drawing from that experience, what level do you think we will be able to realize this budget?
I don't want to first of all quote a figure, but let me first of all say that a typical budget will have the revenue leg and the expenditure leg. Now, the revenue is also proposed. You don't have it. So it is when you are getting, you're matching it to the expenditure aspect of it. The fiscal aspect of it will have the revenue leg and expenditure leg. Now, what will determine whether your budget is going to perform or not is how much revenue you're getting to match that expenditure. And that is why, to an extent, some of the things that you budget initially don't eventually get implemented or get actualized. Dr. Echetama talked about it. So, given the underperformance of the 2022 budget and all these unanticipated shocks in the system, I want to suggest that if all the scenarios are constant, we may end up being very, very optimistic, achieving close to 70 to 80% of the budget. That's if nothing happens. But then again, we cannot rule out because we depend on oil and we don't control oil prices. We are talking about 1.6 million barrels per day as an assumption, and it doesn't work like that. Then you're talking about exchange rate. You know, exchange rate that we suggested, in fact, is almost going to be a fruition that, given the fact that the MPF talked about 410 naira per dollar, but the budget is talking about 433 naira per dollar. So you discover that it has already told us that we are devaluing. And so when we are devaluing, it means that whatever revenue we're going to be will also be affected. And so it's also going to affect the implementation of the budget.
Dr. Cheta, this variation in exchange rate, because there is a parallel market rate and there is also the official exchange rate at which the budget, which form part of the parameters of the budget, 435.57. Now, do you not see that disparity? You know, people talk about round tripping, going and buying and selling and all that. You know, do you not see it as a very unfortunate thing that is affecting the budget itself? And you know, how are we that disparity? How can we actually realize something that is reasonable between the two rates? And why should we even in the first place have two rates?
No, it is a clear indication that the budget had already failed. It's clear indication, because if you check the benchmark, the assumptions is that we have the oil to be sold at $70 per barrel. Okay. That's the assumption. Then, and daily oil production of 1.69 million per day, barrels per day. Then you talk about the exchange rate at 410. But when you go to the black market today, you have dollar at 700 and something. So to that extent, I tell you that the budget had already failed in its performance from the onset. So some of us will tell you it is just a mere ritual. Let us just say it, because we must, it is constitutional that we have to do the budget. But any economy that is serious would understand that it is the forces of demand and supply that fixes the price. And look at it. Why is it that there is...
What the government tell us.
Why is it that there is pressure? If you, in Nigeria today, come with your dollar, it will be exchanged for 700 and something thousand, 700 and something naira in a parallel market in Nigeria. Now what happens? That arbitrage, some people, that corruption also, will go to central bank, buy at that official rate of 430 something naira, bring it to the parallel market and sell it and make huge sums. So that tells you the inefficiencies.
That's also part of the fraud and corruption.
Yes, the inefficiencies in the system, what we call the market failure. The market has failed. The system is not working. If the system is working, then that boils down to institutionalizing some of all these things. We don't have institutions that are working. You see that individuals are stronger than institutions. And that tells you that foreigners, look at our foreign direct investment. It's at the lowest end. Nobody will want to invest in country where you are not sure about the institutions. For example, if a foreigner is coming to invest in Nigeria and he knows that he knows that our legal system is not supportive of whatever he's going to be doing, the court can give order and it is not obeyed, then why is he going to invest in Nigeria? That tells you if the institutions are not, if institutions are not working, you see that the economy cannot work. So whether we like it or not, the budget 2023 had already failed, because in that budget you are saying that dollar is 430 something naira, but in parallel market dollar is 700 and something naira.
So somebody can go buy at 400
and sell it. And again you ask yourself, why too much pressure on the exchange rate? It's because we want to be treated overseas. And we need foreign exchange to be treated overseas. We want to have good education. So we need to get it outside. And for us to get it outside, there is pressure on the dollar. Oh, we want the dollar, we want the pound. And if there is demand for your product, the price automatically goes up. That explains why you see the dollar going up, because there is much demand for it. Our leaders today, if they want to get treatment, they go overseas to be treated. You want to get good education, you go overseas. If you also want to eat good food, you still go overseas to get good food. And to that extent, what are we producing? That boils down to the fact that we don't have manufacturing firms. What is going to support them? Do you have the infrastructure? Do you have electricity? How can you run your factory using diesel that is 800 and something naira per liter? So what will now be the price of the product? So you see, through circular flow of income, the people keep going round, and at the end of the day, it is the ordinary man that is on the street that will continue to suffer it.
It's okay. Dr. Mosu, now we have been struggling with revenue generation. The economy is not generating enough. And that is the reason we are struggling with closing the gap. Assuming, just like you mentioned about shock, anything happens and the revenue dips further. So how are we going to how are we going to navigate out of it in the course of assuming anything happens?
First of all, we've been in that cycle since the inception of this administration. We've been borrowing. Well, not of their own making. Nobody wants to borrow for borrowing's sake. Removing the corruption aspect of it, not being able to account what we have borrowed, and not seeing any tangible thing on the ground to show that money borrowed has been implemented. Now we are borrowing, and we expected that this budget is going to throw up huge deficit that will also require us to borrow. Okay. Now, one of the principles of economics will tell you that if you want to make profit, you reduce cost. Now, I don't want to go political, but then reducing cost first of all will mean that you will plug the leakages. Okay. For instance, we have a presidential candidate telling us that you can plug the leakages. Now, you can imagine what will happen to government revenue if oil theft went into almost 700 something thousand per barrel. Yeah. At the exchange rate, if we're able to do that, we'll be able to save enough money. So one of the ways I will suggest is for government to plug these leakages. Now, our institutions are not very strong, and that is why there are loopholes. If you're a very smart person and you're running a certain institution, you see opportunities to make free money. So if we have very strong institutions, we can actually leverage on that to make sure that the money budgeted are actually spent. Then another thing is, I talked about expenditure restructuring. What are we paying for? What are we paying for? Are we paying to consume only? So if government wants to restructure expenditure, let them spend on things that are going to bring the required, or that will bring the required infrastructural gap, that will create the enabling environment for investors to come. Then we're also talking about
this thing you said now reminds me, as part of if you break down the current expenditure, you see some lines where they're spending 14 billion in telephone calls, internet subscription, newspapers, and the rest of those things. Is it not disturbing? And then in another line you see 11 billion between the president and the vice president for food and their foreign trips. It's supposed what you are saying, that if these monies are channeled to capital expenditure, things that can generate revenue, then that's a positive for the economy. I guess that's what you are saying.
Yes, Dr. Cheta, I'm wondering the type of call someone will be making, and he will spend up to 1 billion naira in a year. I'm wondering the type of food. Are you going to be eating live cow on daily basis or on individual basis?
The thing boils down, it is not just for them alone, but those that will be visiting the villa and all that.
No, that notwithstanding.
They don't need to accommodate all of
that. Notwithstanding, again,
if we have to follow that, then how does the budget now affect all of us? How many persons will be visiting the villa?
We don't need those people. We don't need them. If you want to go back to your house, because government wants to work. So you don't come to government. As a matter of fact, it's because of the way we run our government. So when you're going to visit someone, you expect that when you're going, they give you a handout and all that. But when they know that when you come, you go empty-handed, nobody is going to come. Yeah. So all those things you call that, the NDA, the ministries, you see them put all those huge amounts of money for things that cannot be accounted for, because they know that it comes and then they go away with it. You're even talking about padding. It is worse with the ministries, the NDA. That's where they pad the budget. And at the end of the day, they will give one frivolous contract and somebody will take all of them.
Can you imagine? So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of the program. We appreciate your contribution, viewers. We appreciate your being part of the program. Please keep a date with us. Here we round up the program. Thank you for coming, Dr. Cheta.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Chimeju.
Thank you for inviting me.
Please be part of the program when next we need your attention.
Thank you.